Stand up and show me your ID now.
Am I being detained or is this a consensual encounter?
You're being detained until I figure out who you are.
Then state the crime, because eating lunch is not one.
The body camera footage that would eventually destroy Officer Kyle Miller's career and cost the city of Charleston nearly $1 million began with 30 seconds of silence. It was a perfect Tuesday afternoon in late October, the kind of day where the heat of the South gives way to a crisp golden autumn breeze. The camera mounted to the chest of a 29-year-old patrol officer captured the rhythmic crunch of boots on gravel as he walked through the manicured paths of Marion Square Park. Officer Miller wasn't responding to a bank robbery. He wasn't chasing a violent fugitive. He was responding to a suspicious person call that had come in from a resident of the luxury condos overlooking the park, a call that described nothing more than a man sitting on a bench. The man in question was Elias Thorne. At 58 years old, Elias was a portrait of dignity. He was wearing a charcoal gray bespoke suit, though he had removed the jacket and folded it neatly next to him on the iron bench. His tie was loosened slightly at the collar, and he was halfway through a turkey sandwich from the deli down the street. Elias wasn't loitering. He was taking his federally mandated lunch break. He had spent the morning reviewing compliance reports for the Department of Justice, and he had chosen this specific bench because it offered a clear view of the old Citadel building. He had a copy of the Wall Street Journal open on his lap, and his reading glasses were perched on the bridge of his nose. To anyone with a shred of common sense, Elias Thorne looked exactly like what he was, a senior professional taking a quiet moment in the middle of a workday. But Officer Kyle Miller didn't see a professional. Miller, who had been on the force for just under 4 years and was already developing a reputation for being aggressive with quality-of-life enforcement, saw a target. The dispatch call had mentioned a black male approximately 50 to 60 loitering near the fountain. In Miller's mind, the affluent neighborhood surrounding the park didn't match the man on the bench. He had already decided before he even opened his mouth that Elias didn't belong there. Miller approached from the side, his thumbs hooked into his duty belt, his posture stiff and confrontational. He didn't offer a greeting. He didn't ask how the day was going. He stopped 3 feet from where Elias was eating and cast a shadow over the newspaper. "Hey, buddy," Miller said. His voice was loud, shattering the peace of the park. "We need to talk." Elias Thorne didn't jump. He didn't scramble to pack up his things. He slowly chewed the bite of sandwich he had just swallowed, and then looked up over the rim of his reading glasses. His eyes were calm, possessing the heavy, settled weight of a man who had seen everything the legal system had to offer. He folded his newspaper deliberately, placing it on his lap. "Good afternoon, officer," Elias said. His voice was a deep baritone, polished and articulate. "Is there something I can help you with?" "Yeah, you can tell me what you're doing here," Miller said, stepping closer. The camera captured the aggression in his stance. He was looming, trying to project dominance. "I am eating my lunch," Elias replied simply. "I assume that is not a violation of city ordinance." "We got a call," Miller said, cutting him off. "Suspicious individual, loitering. People are concerned. You don't live around here, do you?" Elias picked up a napkin and wiped the corner of his mouth. "Officer, I am sitting on a public bench in a public park during daylight hours. I am not soliciting, I am not intoxicated, and I am not disturbing the peace. Whether I live around here is irrelevant to my right to be here." Miller's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to people talking back, especially not with words like irrelevant. He was used to fear. He was used to immediate submission. "I didn't ask for a law lecture. I asked for your ID. Let's see it." Elias sighed, a sound of profound disappointment rather than fear. He turned his body slightly to face the officer fully. "Officer, before we proceed, I need you to answer a question. Am I being detained, or is this a consensual encounter?" The question hung in the air, heavy and precise. "Am I being detained?" It was the kind of question that rookie officers dreaded and arrogant officers hated. Officer Kyle Miller was firmly in the latter category. He shifted his weight, his hand dropping instinctively to rest near his holster, not drawing but signaling a threat. The body camera audio picked up the rustle of his uniform and the sharp intake of breath. "You're being detained until I figure out who you are and what you're doing," Miller snapped. "Now give me your ID. I'm not going to ask you again." Elias Thorne remained seated. He did not reach for his pocket. He did not reach for the jacket folded beside him. He kept his hands perfectly visible on his knees, palms open. "Officer, for a detention to be lawful under Terry v. Ohio, you must possess reasonable, articulable suspicion that a crime has been committed, is being committed, or is about to be committed. A vague report of a suspicious person without specific conduct does not meet that standard. So I will ask you again, what specific crime do you suspect me of committing?" Miller's face flushed a deep red. He looked around the park. A few people were walking their dogs. A nanny was pushing a stroller about 50 yards away. They were starting to look over. Miller felt his authority slipping, and his ego couldn't handle the bruising. "You're failing to identify," Miller said, his voice rising. "That's a crime. In this state, you have to identify yourself when an officer asks." "That is incorrect," Elias said, his tone remaining maddeningly conversational. "This is not a stop and identify state unless I am lawfully arrested or validly detained. Since you have articulated no crime, there is no valid detention. Therefore, I am not obligated to provide identification papers to satisfy your curiosity. I am a citizen eating a sandwich." "Listen to me," Miller growled, stepping into Elias's personal space. "You're acting belligerent. You're obstructing my investigation. That gives me all the cause I need. Stand up." "I am not belligerent," Elias corrected him. "I am asserting my Fourth Amendment rights. There is a distinct legal difference, officer. I would strongly suggest you consider your next move very carefully. You are on the precipice of a significant mistake." "I don't need advice from a vagrant," Miller spat out the word. He saw the suit, but he didn't see it. He saw a man who refused to bow, and that made him a threat. "Last chance. ID. Now." "No," Elias said. "I do not consent to this search or seizure. If I am not under arrest, I am going to finish my lunch." Miller reached for his radio, clicking the button on his shoulder mic. "Dispatch show me with one uncooperative male at Marion Square. Requesting backup. Subject is refusing lawful orders and acting erratic." Elias shook his head slowly. "Erratic, officer, the camera on your chest is recording everything. It sees me sitting still. It hears me speaking calmly. You are fabricating a narrative in real time. That is known as falsifying a police report. That is a felony." "Shut up!" Miller yelled. The shout drew the attention of a woman sitting on a bench across the path. She was in her 40s, wearing jogging clothes. She pulled out her phone and held it up, the universal signal that the world was now watching. Miller saw her but ignored her. He was too committed now. He couldn't back down without looking weak in front of the civilians. "You want to play lawyer?" Miller said, unclipping his handcuffs from his belt. The metallic rattle was distinct and sharp. "We can play lawyer at the station. Stand up. Turn around." Elias looked at the officer, his eyes narrowing slightly. He calculated the variables. He could continue to sit, forcing the officer to physically drag him up, which would look worse for the department but risked physical injury. Or he could comply under duress, preserving his dignity and his physical safety while securing the lawsuit. Elias chose the latter. "I am complying with your orders only because you are threatening me with physical force," Elias said, his voice projecting clearly for the bystander's phone and the body camera. "I am not resisting. I am not consenting." Elias stood up slowly. He towered over Officer Miller by 2 inches. He turned around, placing his hands behind his back, interlacing his fingers. "You're making a mistake that you cannot undo, son," Elias said softly. "Stop talking," Miller said, grabbing Elias's wrists and slapping the cold steel cuffs onto them. He ratcheted them tighter than necessary. "You're under arrest." The sensation of handcuffs was something Elias Thorne had not felt in 40 years, not since a protest in D.C. during his college years. But the cold metal biting into his wrists today felt different. It wasn't the badge of honor of a protest. It was the sharp sting of injustice. Officer Miller shoved him slightly forward, forcing him to spread his feet. "What am I being arrested for?" Elias asked. He didn't turn his head. He stared straight ahead at the statue in the center of the park. "Obstruction of justice," Miller reciting the catch-all charge used by lazy officers everywhere. "Disorderly conduct, failure to obey a lawful order." "Those are derivative charges," Elias noted. "They require an underlying lawful basis. You still haven't named the crime I was committing before you approached me." "I said shut up." Miller grabbed Elias by the bicep. He turned to the woman recording them. "Back up, ma'am. This is an active crime scene. You interfere, you're next." The woman didn't back up. "I'm on public property, officer," she shouted back. "He wasn't doing anything. I've been here for 20 minutes. He was just eating." "I've got it, ma'am," Elias called out to her, his voice steady. "Please keep recording. Do not stop until we leave. My name is Elias Thorne." Miller jerked Elias toward the patrol car parked at the curb. "Get moving." As they walked, Elias looked at his jacket and newspaper left on the bench. "My personal property," Elias said. "You are required to secure it." Miller groaned, annoyed. He dragged Elias over to the bench, snatched up the expensive suit jacket and the newspaper and stuffed them haphazardly under his arm. He then marched Elias to the cruiser. He opened the back door and pushed Elias's head down a rough, unnecessary gesture, guiding him into the cramped plastic seat. The back of a police cruiser is designed to be dehumanizing. The hard plastic seat, the cage separating the front and back, the smell of stale sweat and industrial cleaner. Elias sat awkwardly, his hands pinned behind his back, straining his shoulders. He closed his eyes for a moment, centering himself. He needed to be sharp. Miller got into the driver's seat. He was breathing hard, the adrenaline of the confrontation still pumping through him. He typed something into his computer terminal. He didn't look back at his prisoner. He was already rehearsing his story for the sergeant. Subject was hostile, refused to identify. Aggressive movements. I feared for my safety. "Officer Miller," Elias said from the back seat. "I want you to note the time. It is 1:14 p.m. You have officially deprived a citizen of their liberty without probable cause. Every minute that passes from this moment forward increases the liability for your department." Miller slammed his hand on the steering wheel. "You know, usually people shut up when they get the bracelets on. You just don't know when to quit. You think you're the first guy to threaten me with a lawsuit. I got a union rep who eats guys like you for breakfast." "I assure you," Elias said dryly, "he has never eaten anyone like me." Miller started the engine and pulled away from the curb lights, flashing unnecessarily as he merged into traffic. The ride to the precinct was short, maybe 10 minutes. Miller turned up the radio, blasting talk radio to drown out any further comments from the back seat. Elias sat in silence, watching the city pass by. He saw the courthouse where he had argued cases. He saw the federal building where his office was located on the top floor. They arrived at the central precinct. Miller pulled into the sally port, the heavy garage door rattling shut behind them. He hauled Elias out of the car. "Let's go," Miller said. "Processing. Then you can sit in a cell until you decide to tell us who you are." "My identification is in my jacket pocket," Elias said as they walked through the secure doors into the booking area. "The jacket you crumpled into the front seat." Miller ignored him and pushed him toward the booking desk. The room was bright fluorescent and loud. Phones were ringing. Other officers were chatting. Behind the high desk sat Sergeant Tom Reynolds. Reynolds was 55, a 30-year veteran with gray hair and a tired face. He had seen it all. He looked up as Miller approached with Elias in tow. Reynolds looked at Elias, the suit, the posture, the calm expression, and then he looked at Miller. Reynolds frowned. He knew a dirtbag when he saw one, and he knew a solid citizen when he saw one. Elias Thorne looked like the kind of man who played golf with the mayor. "What do we have here, Miller?" Reynolds asked, his voice weary. "Refusal to identify obstruction disorderly," Miller said, puffing out his chest. "Guy wouldn't give me ID in the park. Started making a scene, gathering a crowd." Reynolds looked at Elias. "That true, sir?" "The officer approached me while I was eating lunch," Elias said. "He had no reasonable suspicion. I asserted my rights. He arrested me." Reynolds sighed. He looked at Miller. "Did you search him?" "Pat down only. His wallet is in his jacket," Miller said, dropping the suit jacket onto the counter. "Uncuff him so we can print him," Reynolds said. Miller removed the cuffs. Elias rubbed his wrists. There were red marks where the metal had dug in. "Empty your pockets, sir," Reynolds said respectfully. "We need to inventory your property." Elias reached for the jacket on the counter. He reached into the inside breast pocket and pulled out a slim leather wallet. He placed it on the counter. "My identification is inside," Elias said, "along with my credentials." Reynolds picked up the wallet. He flipped it open. The booking room was noisy, a cacophony of ringing telephones, squawking radios, and the low murmur of officers processing arrests. But the moment Sergeant Tom Reynolds opened the leather wallet, a strange bubble of silence seemed to form around the booking desk. Reynolds stared at the credentials. He blinked, thinking perhaps his reading glasses were dirty. He leaned in closer. On the left side of the wallet was a heavy metallic badge, gold and blue. On the right was a laminated ID card with a holographic seal. United States Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division, Elias J. Thorne, Senior Federal Monitor. Reynolds felt a cold drop of sweat slide down his spine. He knew what a federal monitor was. Everyone in law enforcement knew. These were the people sent by Washington when a police department was so corrupt, so broken, or so incompetent that the federal government had to step in and take over. They were the auditors, the hunters, the ones who had the power to fire chiefs and dissolve units. And Officer Kyle Miller, the department's loose cannon, had just arrested one for eating a sandwich. Reynolds looked up slowly. His face had drained of color. He looked at Elias Thorne, who was standing quietly rubbing his wrist waiting. "Officer Miller," Reynolds said. His voice was very quiet, but it had an edge that cut through the room noise. "Yeah, Sarge." Miller was filling out paperwork, oblivious. "Come here. Just a sec, gotta finish the probable cause statement. Put the pen down and come here, now." Miller looked up, startled by the tone. He walked over to the desk. "What's up?" "He got a warrant." Reynolds didn't answer. He simply turned the wallet around and pushed it across the counter toward Miller. "Read that. Read it out loud." Miller looked down. He squinted. "United States Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division." Miller stopped. He looked up at Elias, then back at the ID. "Senior Federal Monitor." Miller scoffed a nervous, incredulous sound. "This is fake. Gotta be. You can buy these online. This guy's a sovereign citizen or something." Elias spoke for the first time since entering the room. "Officer Miller, if you believe that credential is fraudulent, I encourage you to add impersonating a federal officer to my charges. That is a federal felony. Please call the FBI field office. The number is on the back of the card. Ask for Special Agent in Charge Henderson. Tell him you have Elias Thorne in custody." Miller looked at Elias. The confidence was gone, replaced by a creeping dread. Reynolds snatched the wallet back. He looked at Elias. Sir, you work for the DOJ. I am currently the lead monitor for the consent decree in the neighboring county, Elias said calmly. And I was in town meeting with your district attorney regarding a separate civil rights inquiry. I decided to take a lunch break. Reynolds closed his eyes for a brief second. Miller, take the handcuffs off. Oh, wait, they are off. Don't touch him again. Sarge, he refused to ID. Miller protested, his voice cracking. Even if he's a Fed, he has to follow the law. He knows the law better than you do, you idiot, Reynolds snapped, losing his composure. You arrested a federal civil rights monitor for loitering. Do you have any idea what you just did? I want to speak to your watch commander, Elias said, and I want the chief of police notified immediately. Sir, we can clear this up, Reynolds said, his hands shaking slightly as he held the wallet. It's a misunderstanding. We can release you right now. No record. No, Elias said firmly. I have been arrested. I have been transported. I have been booked. The seizure has occurred. You cannot unarrest me to save face. I want the watch commander, and I want my phone call. Reynolds looked at the other officers in the room. They had all stopped working. They were staring. They realized the ship was sinking, and they were all on board. Miller, Reynolds hissed. Go to the break room. Sit down. Don't talk to anyone. Don't text anyone. Just sit there. But Sarge, go! Miller slinked away, looking like a scolded child, but there was still defiance in his eyes. He didn't think he was wrong. He just thought he was unlucky. Reynolds picked up the phone. He dialed the lieutenant's extension. LT, it's Reynolds. You need to come down to booking. Now. No, listen to me. Miller arrested a guy. It's bad. It's the DOJ, sir. The guy is a federal monitor. Yes, he's standing right here. Elias watched the sergeant panic. He felt no satisfaction, only a weary resolve. This was the system he had spent 30 years fighting. It wasn't just Miller. It was the sergeant trying to cover it up. It was the culture that allowed Miller to exist. Sir, Reynolds said, hanging up the phone. Lieutenant Creates is coming down. Can I get you some water? Coffee? A chair? I would like a chair, Elias said. And I would like you to ensure that the body camera footage from Officer Miller's camera is uploaded and locked immediately. If 20 seconds of that footage goes missing, Sergeant, I will ensure that you are named personally in the federal lawsuit. It won't go missing, sir, Reynolds promised, pale-faced. I'm locking it now. Elias sat on the metal stool provided. He crossed his legs. He waited. The machinery of the department was about to grind to a halt, all because of a sandwich and an ego. Within 20 minutes, the atmosphere in the central precinct had shifted from a typical Tuesday afternoon to something resembling a bomb threat response. The booking area had been cleared of other arrestees. Elias Thorne sat alone on a bench, his jacket folded neatly beside him, again, reading a copy of the local newspaper that someone had hurriedly provided. Lieutenant Marcus Freeman was the first to arrive. He was a sharp man, usually calm, but he burst through the doors with his tie flying over his shoulder. He took one look at Elias, recognized him from a news segment he'd seen months ago, and felt his stomach drop. Freeman walked over to Sergeant Reynolds, who whispered the details. Freeman rubbed his temples, then he approached Elias. Mr. Thorne, I'm Lieutenant Freeman. I am the watch commander. Elias didn't stand. He looked up. Lieutenant, sir, I've reviewed the preliminary report from Officer Miller. I've also spoken to the chief's office. We want to apologize for the inconvenience. We're going to process your release immediately. We'll expunge the arrest record by the end of the day. Expunge. Elias raised an eyebrow. Lieutenant, you are moving too fast. Expungement implies that the arrest happened, and we are scrubbing it. I am concerned with why it happened. Have you watched the footage? Not yet, sir. It's downloading now. Watch it, Elias said. Don't speak to me again until you have watched it. You need to understand what you are defending. Freeman hesitated, then nodded. Yes, sir. He went into the sergeant's office. 10 minutes later, the doors opened again. This time it was Chief of Police Robert Harrison. Harrison was a politician in a uniform, silver hair, bright teeth, firm handshake. But today, the smile was gone. He had received the call while at a Rotary Club luncheon. Harrison walked straight to Elias. Mr. Thorne, my God, I don't know what to say. Elias stood up this time. He and Harrison had met once briefly at a gala. Chief Harrison. Elias, please. This is a catastrophe, Harrison said, his voice lowered. I have Officer Miller in the captain's office. He's being pulled off the street immediately. Please come to my office. Let's get you out of this holding area. I am fine here, Chief, Elias said. I want to follow the procedure. I was arrested. I should be processed out like anyone else. Elias, don't do this to us, Harrison pleaded slightly. We made a mistake. A terrible mistake, but we can fix this. Can you? Elias asked. Chief Officer Miller arrested me because I wouldn't show him ID while eating a sandwich. He fabricated charges of obstruction. He escalated a consensual encounter into a Fourth Amendment violation in under 60 seconds. And when I told him who I was, he didn't stop. He laughed. Lieutenant Freeman stepped out of the office. He looked sick. He walked up to the chief and whispered in his ear. The video. It's bad, Chief. Real bad. No probable cause. Miller was aggressive. Thorne was perfect. Harrison closed his eyes. He knew what this meant. Where is Officer Miller now? Elias asked. He's being questioned by Internal Affairs, Freeman said. Good, Elias said. I have not been read my Miranda rights, so I assume you are not interrogating me. I am free to go. Of course, Harrison said. You've been free to go for 30 minutes. Then I have some requests, Elias said. His voice hardened. The pleasantries were over. I want digital copies of the incident report, the booking sheet, and the CAD logs from dispatch. I want them provided to me before I leave this building. We can't release evidence that quickly, Freeman started. You can, Elias interrupted. And you will, because if I have to subpoena them, I will also subpoena 5 years of Officer Miller's stop and frisk data. And I suspect, gentlemen, that I am not the first black man he has stopped in Marion Square. The silence that followed was deafening. Harrison looked at Freeman. They both knew the answer. Miller had numbers, high numbers. They had ignored it because he was proactive. We'll get you the copies, Harrison said quietly. And one more thing, Elias said. I want my suit jacket cleaned. Miller threw it on the floor of his cruiser. We'll pay for it, Harrison said. We'll replace it. It's not about the money, Chief, Elias said, picking up his jacket and dusting off a speck of lint. It's about the respect. Elias looked toward the back hallway where the holding cells were. And tell Officer Miller that the fake badge he laughed at, it has more power than he will ever understand. Elias Thorne walked out of the central precinct at 3:45 p.m. The sun was still shining, but the day felt different now. Chief Harrison had offered his personal driver to take Elias home. Elias had declined. He had called an Uber. He wanted to stand on the sidewalk, a free man, and wait like anyone else. As he waited, his phone buzzed. It was his assistant. Elias, are you okay? You missed the 2:00 p.m. call with the mayor's office. I was indisposed, Elias said calmly. I'll explain later. Draft a litigation hold letter. Address it to the city attorney of Charleston. I want it sent by courier before close of business today. A litigation hold. For what case? Target is the Charleston Police Department. Specific focus on Officer Kyle Miller. Preservation of all electronic data, body cams, dash cams, emails, and disciplinary records. There was a pause on the other end. Elias, did something happen? Yes, Elias said, watching a black SUV pull up. I went to the park. Back inside the station, the fallout was nuclear. Officer Kyle Miller was sitting in an interrogation room stripped of his gun and badge. He was still trying to argue. He didn't listen, Miller shouted at the internal affairs investigator. He was arrogant. You can't just let people walk all over you. Miller, shut up, the investigator said, rubbing his eyes. Do you know what qualified immunity is? Yeah, it protects me. Not when you knowingly violate a clearly established constitutional right, the investigator said. You demanded ID without reasonable suspicion. Brown visa Texas, Hebel, basic academy stuff, and you did it to a federal monitor. There is no immunity for this. You are on your own. Miller slumped in his chair. The reality was finally starting to crack through his armor of entitlement. In the chief's office, Harrison was on the phone with the city attorney. How bad is it? The attorney asked. It's the worst-case scenario, Harrison said, looking out his window. We have it on video. Miller looks like a bully. Thorne looks like... well, he looks like a federal judge. And there were witnesses. A woman filmed it. Is it on social media yet? I don't know. Check, now. It was. The woman who had filmed the arrest had uploaded it to Twitter 30 minutes ago. It already had 40,000 views. The caption read, Charleston PD arrests elderly man for eating while black. Officer wouldn't listen. Harrison watched the view count tick up 41,000, 45,000, 50,000. We need to settle, Harrison said into the phone. We need to settle this fast, whatever he wants. He's a federal monitor, Bob, the city attorney said, his voice hollow. He doesn't want money. He wants blood. He wants policy changes. He wants your badge. The lawsuit, Thorne v. City of Charleston, was filed 48 hours later. It was a masterpiece of legal writing, concise, brutal, and irrefutable. It alleged violations of the 4th and 14th Amendments, false arrest, false imprisonment, and battery. But the most damaging part was the section on pattern and practice. Elias hadn't just sued for himself. He had used his resources to pull Officer Miller's history. The data was damning. Over 3 years, Miller had conducted 400 suspicious person stops. 85% of them were black men. Only 2% resulted in a citation for an actual crime. The rest were release without charge after running ID. It was a harassment campaign disguised as policing. The media storm was intense. The video of Elias' dignified, calm citing case law while Miller screamed at him played on every national news network. It was the perfect contrast. The unruly, unprofessional cop versus the composed, educated citizen. The internal affairs investigation was concluded in record time. Usually these things took months. This took 2 weeks. The findings were sustained on all counts. Miller had violated department policy, state law, and the U.S. Constitution. But Elias didn't stop with Miller. He went after the supervisors. He deposed Sergeant Reynolds. Why did you allow the arrest to proceed when the officer could not articulate a crime? Elias asked during the deposition. I assumed he had cause, Reynolds stammered. Assumption is not probable cause, Sergeant, Elias replied. You are the gatekeeper. You failed. The city attorney called Elias's lawyer, an old friend from law school, to discuss a settlement. We're offering $250,000, the city attorney said, and Miller is already suspended pending termination. We're not interested in the money, Elias's lawyer said. Elias wants $750,000, and he wants a consent decree. A consent decree, you can't demand that in a settlement. Then we go to trial, the lawyer said. And Elias will put the chief on the stand. He will put the mayor on the stand. He will expose the fact that you knew about Miller's numbers and did nothing. Do you want that in an election year? The city attorney folded. They settled for $850,000. But the non-monetary terms were the real victory. The department agreed to an independent audit of all stop and identify encounters for the next 5 years. They agreed to mandatory constitutional law training for all officers, not just academy recruits. And they agreed to a zero-tolerance policy for officers who failed to activate body cameras. Officer Kyle Miller was terminated on a Friday. He tried to appeal through the union, but the union refused to back him. The video was too embarrassing. The union president told him, "You picked a fight with the wrong guy, Kyle. You're done." Miller lost his job, his pension, and his certification. In South Carolina, once decertified for cause you cannot work as a police officer again. At 29, his career in law enforcement was over. 6 months later, Elias Thorne sat on the same bench in Marion Square. It was spring now. The azaleas were in bloom, bursting with pink and white flowers. He had his jacket folded next to him. He was eating a turkey sandwich. He watched a pair of police officers walking the beat. They were young, diverse, one white female, one black male. They walked past a group of teenagers playing music, a little too loud. Elias watched closely. The old way would have been to storm and demand ID and assert dominance. Instead, the female officer waved. "Afternoon, guys. Keep the volume down a bit, okay? People are reading." "Sure thing, officer," one of the kids said, turning the speaker down. The officers kept walking. They saw Elias. They nodded respectfully. "Good afternoon, sir." "Good afternoon," Elias replied. It was a small change, a tiny shift in the universe, but it was there. Elias had donated the entire $850,000 settlement. Half went to the local public defender's office to hire 2 new attorneys dedicated to misdemeanor defense. The other half went to a scholarship fund for children of incarcerated parents. He didn't keep a dime. The Department of Justice had officially opened a larger probe into the department triggered by the data Elias had uncovered. Ironically, Elias had to recuse himself from the oversight team to avoid a conflict of interest. He didn't mind. He had done his part. But as he sat there enjoying the peace, Elias felt a lingering sadness. He thought about Officer Miller. He didn't hate the young man. He pitied him. Miller was a product of a system that taught him that a badge meant he was a king and that citizens were subjects. Miller had destroyed his own life because he couldn't handle a simple no. And Elias thought about the men who weren't federal monitors, the men who didn't have law degrees, the men who didn't have the right kind of ID in their wallets. What happened to them? When they were stopped in this park and they asserted their rights and they were handcuffed, they didn't get an apology from the chief. They got a criminal record. They lost their jobs. They lost their dignity. Elias had won because he was Elias Thorne. But the victory felt hollow because it shouldn't have required a federal badge to be treated like a human being. The Constitution applies to the janitor just as much as it applies to the judge. Or at least it's supposed to. He finished his sandwich, wiped his mouth, and stood up. He put on his jacket, smoothing the lapels. He looked at the empty bench. It was just a piece of wood and iron, but it was also a battleground. Elias picked up his briefcase and began the walk back to his office. He had work to do. As long as there were officers like Miller, and as long as there were systems that protected them, his lunch breaks would never truly be peaceful. Thank you for reading this story. It's a stark reminder that authority without accountability is just tyranny, and that knowing your rights is your first line of defense. Here is a question for you. If Elias hadn't been a federal official, do you think the department would have ever admitted they were wrong? Or would he just be another statistic? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and please subscribe if you believe in justice and accountability. See you in the next story.